My name is Denika Carothers. I am a life and relationship coach, and I specialize in mental and emotional wellness. My focus is helping you let the shit, shame, hurt, insecurities, and triggers go. Thank you for joining me today on this special webinar. You are here because you are ready to let the shit go. You may be on the other side of a divorce or a separation, or you may be struggling in a current relationship. Shit affects us all, but in the midst of your life and or relationship challenges, it's important to give yourself permission to figure out what you want and discover your own inner happiness by tapping into your internal source of joy rather than expecting or looking for others to make you happy. In today's world, relationships are under great attack. People are either trying to save their relationship or they're trying to heal on the other side of a broken one. What so many do not understand is the role that relationships play in our lives. Relationships are significant to who we are, and they are key to how we show up in life. But when you don't understand the value of something, you tend to take it for granted, or you don't give it the worth that it deserves. Our emotional foundation is built on relationships. We begin our life experience in relationship. The state and influence of our early relationships greatly affect what we understand and believe about relationships, and consequently, how we show up in them. Our very first relationship is with our mother when we are in the womb. We feel every vibration from our mother. We feel her joy and we feel her sorrow. We feel her rage and we feel her peace. We feel her fears and we feel her confidence. We feel her hopes and we feel her disappointments. We feel her love, but we also feel her hate. A baby's senses actually start developing just a few weeks after conception, forming the basis of their attachment to their biological mother and an understanding of the world around them through her. Research shows that during pregnancy, babies feel what their mother feels, and with the same intensity. That means if she's crying, her baby feels the same emotion as if it's their own. During the gestational period, babies are preparing themselves for life in the outside world. When my mother was pregnant, she felt very rejected by my father when she was pregnant with me. And my biggest struggle in life has been feeling rejected by others. Earlier in my life, I was so concerned with how others saw me or thought about me, but I didn't let on that I felt this way. And so I suffered with shame and insecurity in silence. I had a hard exterior, and as far as others were concerned, I was unbothered by what people did and what people had to say. But the truth is, I let what others thought about me affect my confidence and my self-esteem. Every pregnancy I experienced was sad and emotional, and I've had 3 of them. I got married when I was pregnant with my first child and realized the following day that I had made a big mistake. But of course, I couldn't go through the shame of a failed marriage before it even began. So I stayed married and spent most of the remaining 5.5 months of my pregnancy crying a lot. I felt shame, hurt, insecurity, and triggers, which resulted in feeling rejected, lonely, and depressed. Because my husband, who felt forced into marriage because, yes, I issued an ultimatum for this marriage because I didn't want to have a baby out of wedlock, but he continued to act like he was single, if you know what I mean. During my second pregnancy, 2 years later, my children's father and I separated after I discovered that he was having an affair. During that pregnancy, I made my first suicide attempt. Again, I felt shame, hurt, insecurity, and triggers, which resulted in feeling rejected, lonely, and depressed. While in our mother's womb, we get a vibrational understanding of what the life we are about to come into feels like. We experience our first emotions from our mother. In the womb experience, emotion, which is energy in motion, is felt by and passed on to the fetus. If what we see and feel in relationships during our childhood is dysfunction, toxicity, unhappiness, disrespect, and pain, we tend to believe that this is how relationships are. The greatest challenge when it comes to how we experience relationships is we are not taught how to be in relationships. We are shown by what we see. What we believe relationships are is the relationship experience that we create for ourselves. Because as a person thinks in their heart, or belief is what they will experience. Most people believe that relationships are hard, difficult, and a struggle. This is the foundation upon which they build their relationships. Because as you think in your heart, as you believe, so you will experience. And so their experience of relationships include unhappiness, disappointment, dysfunction, which is simply being disconnected from functioning optimally, shame, hurt, insecurities, and triggers. Shit. We have all been impacted and negatively affected by shit, shame, hurt, insecurities, and triggers. And we have all experienced it in our childhood. As a child, I never felt loved by my father. I felt criticized. I felt judged and misunderstood. I felt rejected and not supported. I can remember being 3 years old and sitting on the back step of our house, feeling very alone. I can actually remember being outside by myself a lot. Even today, this feeling of aloneness tries to affect me, but thankfully, I know how to move through it when it shows up. And when it shows up, I usually want to do something outdoors. I experienced feeling very rejected as a child, which created some deep shit. It started with my father. And as I think back, the rejection that I felt came mostly by way of men. My 6th grade male teacher criticized me. My 8th grade chemistry teacher made me feel I wasn't smart in chemistry. My 12th grade teacher saw all the other students except me. But this was my own perception based on the energy of rejection that was passed to me in my womb experience. We all see life through reference points that often include trauma and pain. We all see life through our shit, and we often hold on to that shit, and it impacts, blocks, and dis-eases us, disconnects us from ease in life in so many ways. The same way shit unreleased from your body will create physical issues, shit stored and unreleased, shame, hurt, insecurities, and triggers will create emotional issues. And these issues always impact your relationships. So in today's webinar, I am going to break the shit down so that you have a clearer understanding of what it is and why it's important to choose to let it go. So what is shame and how does it impact you? The Oxford Dictionary defines shame as a painful feeling of humiliation or distress caused by the consciousness of wrong or foolish behavior. We understand shame to be something that can bring about a loss of respect or honor. Unfortunately, so many of us as children experience this emotion way too early. And in many instances, it is caused by someone that we trust or someone who has a great deal of influence or authority in our life. Shame affects our autonomic nervous system, otherwise known as ANS, of which there are 2 branches, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems. When faced with shame, the brain reacts as if it were facing physical danger and activates the sympathetic nervous system, generating the fight, flight, freeze response. The flight response triggers the feeling of needing to disappear. And children who have this response will try to become invisible and feel very uncomfortable being seen. When we feel shame, our self-esteem is affected. In comparison, we can also exhibit shame by fighting back and becoming very defensive. The fight response expresses itself as verbal and behavioral aggression by the embarrassed person towards the other who caused them to feel ashamed. Because our self-esteem is affected, another manifestation of shame can be the freeze response, which normally occurs when people who are faced with trauma feel trapped and powerless. The freeze response can also support us in surviving situations where intolerable things are happening to us. The freeze response to shame has negative consequences as well as protecting us because it upsets our ability to think clearly, which results in beliefs that we are stuck in a situation where we have no power because we have something wrong with us or we have no other choice. It can cause us to believe that what is happening or has happened is our fault. Soon after birth, we begin storing in our brains an understanding of how our needs are met by our parents or caregivers. How our needs are attended to by those people who we innately understand are the ones who should be protecting, loving, and taking care of us. As children, we innately understand that we should feel three things. We should feel loved, we should feel protected, and we should feel cared for. So these important interactions between our caregivers and ourselves are stored in implicit memory in a structure called the amygdala. Through the information we store in our brains about the responses of our caregivers, we develop an anticipation and expectation of the trustworthiness of relationships based on our early experiences. In simple form, we learn to interpret life through the lens of the messages we receive from our parents and caregivers. We learn to expect in our relationships what we experience in our first relationships. Me, I had daddy issues, major daddy issues. I always felt that my father criticized me and judged me, which made me feel ashamed and not as good as my sister, who was younger than me, or other people around me. Because I had an experience of receiving criticism from the dominant male in my life, which made me feel that I wasn't good enough. I found myself subconsciously expecting to be rejected by the men that I entered into earlier relationships with. And when I was cheated on by my first husband, I felt a great deal of shame and insecurity. I'll dive more into how insecurity affects you in a little bit. Shame can be used in a way that is not destructive, though. For example, if the child is rendering ill treatment to another child and they are chastised publicly for their bad behavior, the adult is attempting to teach the child that this behavior is not acceptable and you are not to behave this way. More often than not, a child who feels shame will cry, but when the caregiver quickly gives them calming reassurance, the child's parasympathetic nervous system becomes activated and the child's arousal will subside. However, most shame is presented in a toxic way as a means of control and embarrassment. So with the same example, the child's sympathetic nervous system is triggered. They enter a state of arousal or upset, where they first feel fear and freeze and then begin to cry. But because there is no reassurance, the parasympathetic nervous system is not triggered and therefore can't do its job of calming the child down. A child exposed to toxic shame often struggles with what they subconsciously expect to encounter in relationships later in life because of their understanding of what relationships represent. This is because the toxic shame experienced in childhood impacts the hippocampus, which is a part of the limbic system responsible for consolidating memory. The hippocampus is important in memory and learning, while the limbic system itself is central in the control of emotional responses. And so in childhood, we internalize into our memory how we should emotionally respond to situations where we feel uncomfortable or uncertain. If we were mistreated, we internalize negative messages about ourselves and in turn tend to expect negativity from others in relationships. The effect is that later in life, when we encounter uncomfortable situations that our hippocampi think is in any way similar to what we encountered in our childhood, we feel shame. Pretty deep, huh? This triggered response then sends us spiraling into an often negative arousal and fear that adversely affects how we form new relationships with others. I will expound more on triggers in a little bit, and you don't want to miss that, because understanding how triggers show up and impact your relationships is key to being able to respond to situations rather than react. The late Dr. John Bradshaw, in his book, Healing the Shame That Binds You, stated the following: prolonged shame states early in life can result in permanently dysregulated autonomic functioning and a heightened sense of vulnerability to others. Their lives are marked by chronic anxiety, exhaustion, depression, and a losing struggle to achieve perfection. Let's talk about hurt and how it impacts you. Hurt can be described as mental pain, emotional pain, or distress. Distress, extreme anxiety, sorrow, or pain can cause you to show up in the world in a crazy way. Most of the time, people who act crazy are subconsciously playing out their childhood wounds. These emotional wounds need to be healed. Otherwise, they continue to manifest as pain over and over again with every new relationship. Craziness is simply pain turned outward. Hurt affects your sense of security. From the moment we are born, we start to develop a sense of self and belonging. We start to develop an idea of who we are, how others feel about us, and where we fit in this big old wide world. Our first feelings and ideas of self come from the relationships we have with our parents. Generally speaking, if children have a healthy relationship with their parents and feel loved and secure at home, they will grow up secure and will have secure adult relationships. But if children come from homes where there's any type of trauma, rejection, abuse, or abandonment, where they don't learn to build a secure sense of self, then they will grow up feeling anxious and insecure. They will have difficulty trusting others and will struggle with how they feel about themselves. Wounded people keep creating drama to keep avoiding themselves. A wound hurts. And so most people, by trying to avoid pain, avoid addressing the wound. People who feel a great degree of emotional hurt often deal with it by not dealing with it. This choice leads to years of unresolved feelings that often show up as emotional disconnect in a relationship. Hurt should not be ignored. Think of a part of your body that is hurting and you don't address the problem. The problem will often grow into a bigger, more serious issue. People who refuse to address unresolved relationship trauma often experience dissolving relationships. A person may experience emotional distress due to various factors, which include grief, loss, trauma, stress, or toxic relationships. These experiences leave an imprint on not just the mind, but also on the body. When working with your pain in the positive, you can learn valuable life lessons and become empowered through what you learn in those lessons. However, suppressing emotional pain can negatively affect your health, your happiness, and your overall well-being. Yes, the actions of others towards you can sometimes cause emotional pain, but choosing not to confront it, which is simply addressing it and blocking the thoughts and feelings you don't want to feel, is not healthy. Neither is it wise. Moreover, suppressing emotional pain often manifests as physical symptoms such as depression, anxiety, panic attacks, and sometimes self-harm. A person's thoughts will often trigger the way they feel. Mental and emotional pain are interconnected. Healing emotional pain takes time, patience, perseverance, and love for yourself to be able to accomplish it. When people hurt in relationships but refuse to address their feelings with the person who hurt them, they will often experience emotional suppression. Emotional suppression happens when uncomfortable thoughts and feelings are pushed out of the mind. It is well known that suppressing emotions has a physiological impact on the body, and long-term continual suppression of emotions can have detrimental physical and psychological effects. The effects of suppressed emotions include anxiety, anger, depression, and other stress-related illnesses. These feelings, unmanaged and untended to, will destroy your relationships. Hurt people often tend to play a victim role in their relationships, which results in a victim mindset. Now, being victimized and having a victim mindset are not the same thing. You can be victimized in a situation and still come out on the other side victorious. But when we spend years thinking of ourselves as victims of a sad childhood, bad people, bad luck, it becomes a part of our identity. It is important to learn to take responsibility for your own actions and change the position of blaming every bad thing that happens to you on other people. This behavior and mindset will keep you stuck and playing the victim role. When you play a particular role, you will choose partners that will play the specific role to support your role. This allows you to continue to relive your past with the hope of having a different outcome, thereby healing the old wounds. But subconsciously, we know that's not possible. You can't continue to do the same thing and expect a different result. That's insanity. Others just choose to continue to act in the same way because they know that being in a healthy, drama-free life and relationship would force them to actually face and deal with their pain and their wounds. Facing hurt is not easy, but in order to heal and let the shit go, you have to address the wound. You cannot continue to make other people responsible for the way you act and react to situations. Okay, you may be in a relationship with someone who is a narcissist or exhibits emotionally irrational behavior. It's possible, though, that like you, like me, they are just less than perfect souls with their own traumas and wounds to heal. They are not responsible for your crazy behavior, and they are definitely not responsible for saving or fixing you. Emotional pain is inevitable in life, and anyone can experience it. The distressing effects of emotional pain often lead to unhealthy coping mechanisms, including alcohol and drugs. And though they might mask the pain briefly, these methods will cause more significant harm over time. It doesn't matter whether the pain is from trauma, loss, or disappointment. You must devise a strategy to handle and cope with it. At some point, we have to accept our past, our less than perfect childhoods, and we need to seek help so we can heal the wounds if the memories are haunting our adult lives. Life coaching can be a huge benefit to healing past hurts and emotional wounds. I'll tell you more about how it can help you at the end of today's webinar. So stick with me. Now let's talk about what is insecurity and how does that impact you? Insecurity fuels a lack of emotional confidence and security, which can lead to major issues in a relationship. Being insecure is not the same thing as a lack of trust. You can have all the trust in the world that your partner is going to be good to you, but still feel insecure. Our core insecurities often stem from attachment wounds, which is a way to describe any time there was a significant relationship that has ruptured our trust in the past. This can create defensiveness that pushes people away and robs us of the opportunity of ever letting anyone truly in. Insecure people always show up defensive. You can be with the right person and still feel insecure in your relationship. When you have a fear of letting anyone get too close to you, you often self-sabotage your relationships without even being aware of what you are doing. Insecurity is something that drives a wedge in most relationships. I was married to a person who was extremely insecure. And how that affected me negatively was I found myself dimming my light, denying what I desired to compensate for this person's insecurity. And at the end of the day, I was extremely unhappy in the relationship, trying to hold on, trying not to experience the shame, the hurt, and the insecurities, but recognizing that I was absolutely denying myself of being able to be happy and walk in my passion and in my purpose. And insecure people will often project and make assumptions that can be destructive to the emotional well-being of the relationship, because when you are insecure about who you are, you often will accuse your partner of doing things that they're not even doing. Because insecurity involves feeling inadequate due to a lack of self-confidence. It can cause you to doubt your abilities, instincts, and relationships, which makes it difficult for you to trust other people because you have a hard time believing in yourself. Insecurity can be a painful and difficult emotion to experience, both the person who's feeling it and the person who is the recipient of it. And it often takes a toll on your mental health as well as your relationships. Several factors can lead to feeling insecure in relationships. These can include fear of rejection, low self-esteem, an unpleasant past relationship, lack of self-confidence, neglect or mistreatment, and social anxiety. Insecurity impacts your mental health because at the core, you believe you are not worthy or deserving of love and care. This will affect your romantic relationships as well as your relationships with your friends, your coworkers, your children, and your family members. Because you are constantly questioning your self-worth, you might also accept poor or abusive treatment from other people. Because remember, you draw to yourself someone who is going to support your vibration. So if you don't feel good enough, you are going to draw to yourself someone who is going to treat you as if you are not good enough. And this is going to reinforce your belief that you are unworthy based on what you are experiencing in your relationships. Insecurity impacts relationships by creating an imbalance. You become more preoccupied with what your partner is not providing, is doing, is not doing, and then you tend to demand reassurance or validation for your insecurities. So here are 6 signs of insecurity in a relationship. 1, you don't trust easily. You doubt every little thing. You stalk social media sites. You snoop on your partner, or you feel threatened easily. Number 2, you struggle with intimacy. You struggle with feeling close sexually or emotionally, or both. And you can feel your guard up during intimate moments. Number 3, you become panicked easily. Like during a conflict, you panic that your partner is going to leave, will reject you, or may judge you. Number 4, you easily feel attacked. You feel immediately offended, hurt, or shut down by something your partner asks of you. You instantly feel criticized and want to defend yourself by arguing or by shutting down completely. Number 5, you create mountains over molehills. You pick fights and make them extreme issues. You use hurtful or definitive words and create huge arguments around something that isn't very big once you've taken a step back and looked at it constructively. Number 6, you don't accept yourself. You struggle when it comes to giving yourself permission to just be you. You judge yourself often, and you hold yourself to a high standard that you don't feel you are attaining. Like I said earlier, insecure people often self-sabotage their relationships because ultimately, insecurity works like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because you fear losing your partner, then you begin to act defensively, or you're always on the offense, which in turn drives them away. The feeling of insecurity can be remedied though. Learning how to consciously communicate how you are feeling is a huge factor to receiving the support that can help you. But first, you need to be aware of your insecurities and how they arise in your relationship. Then you can begin to find ways to work on them. Sometimes you need perspective from a trained outside source to fully grasp how your insecurity is linked to more complex dynamics. I help my clients to cope with their insecurity by showing them how to become more self-aware about situations that trigger the insecurity. As a client, I will support you in identifying the problems you need to address and work on. So let's talk about triggers and how they impact you. You come home to a messy house. Your partner has been at home all day with the kids, hoping to catch up on some work. You become furious and yell, "You expect me to do everything. Why can't you just do what needs to be done? It's your house too." On the other hand, your partner feels like they can't get a break. Nothing they do is ever good enough for you. So they think to themselves, why even bother? They stay in silence for the rest of the evening, and you both end up feeling disconnected and alone. How does a messy house become a silent war? When the reaction is bigger than the situation, it's probably a trigger. The intensity of emotion indicates that something more is happening at a deeper level. In the illustrated example, the messy house was not the culprit. What caused the argument was the assumption that your partner didn't care about what you needed. Underneath your hurt was the pain of not having your needs validated as a child. That pain triggered you to feel more upset than the situation warranted. The pain of not being heard, betrayed, lied to, or criticized are examples of experiences from our past that become sensitivities we bring into our present relationships. We become vigilant to these behaviors in others, and it takes only a hint of appearance of the original betrayal to cause a major reaction. These tender spots are the fragile areas of our psyche that are like open wounds. Any slight touch stings with pain and intolerance. The emotional reactions that erupt out of this pain take on proportions that far outweigh a common response. And then we justify our response with an internal logic which supports the perspective that our partner has purposefully hurt us. This will tend to create more unwanted responses from the partner that hurt, because others will perceive our response as unreasonable and become defensive and often rejecting. A trigger is an intense emotional reaction to a present behavior that reminds you of something painful from your past. The trigger itself can be anything. It can be a look, it can be a tone of voice, or a seemingly unintentional behavior that causes you to react more intensely than you normally would. Triggers are situations that represent painful reminders of your past, often linked to childhood, that impact how you react today. Triggers can be traced back to childhood experiences. For instance, if you've experienced rejection or abandonment, you might anticipate the same thing happening in your adult relationships. Maybe you hear criticism where there is none, or assume that something bad will happen, even though there is no cause for concern. Ordinary events such as misunderstandings trigger an overreaction because of the burdens of the past that we carry. We are not just seeing the present moment, but many moments that happened prior to that. Partners can't understand where the accusation is coming from, and their confusion can quickly escalate into frustration as the person who is triggered escalates their attempts to be responded to. Patterns evolve between partners as they try to control, disarm, and dodge these painful burdens from their past. This dance never heals and often serves to repeat the original injury. Let's examine another example to explore this further. A common sensitivity is not being heard. Here is a common scenario. There is some interaction that triggers an experience of being ignored. With the burdens from the past influencing our experience, it is not easy to deal with not being heard. We can't just see it as something ordinary that happens between partners. It, in turn, becomes a major hurt. The feelings of anger, hurt, and frustration emerge. We have a story we tell ourselves over and over, such as, here we go again. Why can't they just listen? They never hear me. They are purposefully ignoring me. How many times do I have to say something? They don't want to hear me. They obviously think I have nothing important to say. We make accusations as if this story is true. Our partner hears this as exaggerated and unjust, so we'll defend against it. This leads to a back and forth of accusation and defense, leaving the triggered partner with more evidence that they are being ignored and the defensive partner feeling blamed. These reactions, triggered feeling, story, and behavior may lead to behaviors ranging from emotionally demanding, raging, controlling, criticizing, or shutting down. No one at this point is listening. These interactions around triggers prevent you from dealing effectively with your responses to each other, and it inhibits understanding happening between you. Being triggered feels overwhelming. Within seconds, the body gets flooded with stress hormones. Increased heart rate, sweating, and muscle tightness make listening virtually impossible. This often leads to blaming your partner, which intensifies the argument. You feel misunderstood and baffled at how a simple comment turns into a war. And then when you can't manage these feelings, you might try to prevent your partner from leaving the room during an argument, obsess about them leaving or cheating on you, struggle with insecurity and self-doubt, send repeated text messages that get increasingly irrational, spend hours searching for them online or driving around, and breaking into their social media accounts to check up on them. So what should you do when you're triggered? Identify the source of the trigger so you can begin to heal it. The first clue that you're dealing with a trigger is the intensity of your reaction. When your reaction doesn't match the situation, you're probably triggered. For example, your partner is running late or doesn't respond to your texts. So now you assume they're doing something they should not be doing and are going to leave you, which is an overreaction, but it's really fear. F-E-A-R, false evidence appearing real. This is what makes you assume the worst. Here are some examples of what triggers look like. Your boss critiques you and it feels like a personal attack. Or your partner seems distracted and you think they don't care about you. It's the negative assumption you make about what's happening that creates your upset, not what's really happening. After recognizing the trigger, the next step is to find the meaning behind it. Significant childhood experiences often provide the missing link. As a mental and emotional wellness specialist who gets to the core root of the triggers, I can help you to identify these childhood experiences that are operating in your subconscious and still affecting you today. Any unresolved issues of abuse, neglect, or trauma will create emotional triggers. A trigger results from an emotional wound that has not healed. Underneath every trigger is a core fear that gets activated. Some common fears are feeling like you're not enough or unworthy, not feeling safe emotionally or physically, feeling left out or abandoned, feeling misunderstood or invalidated, feeling disrespected or criticized. It's important to separate the current situation from the past to get control of your reaction. Once you find where the reaction is coming from, you can see the present situation in a more neutral way. Here are some of the ways that I can help you as your life coach. I will work with you to identify what situations trigger intense reactions for you. Any assumptions or significant meaning that you are assigning to those situations. How your assumptions have hurt you and your relationships. if the assumption is false evidence appearing real. How you can take care of yourself when you are feeling triggered. It is important for you to heal your triggers. Your triggers are your responsibility to ease and work through. It is not your partner's job to be more sensitive, kind, open, happy, calm, and so on, so you won't be triggered. It's important that you work through your past hurts so they don't affect your present and future relationships. You need to become aware of your reactions and the story you make up in your head about your partner. Own it as what you make up. Your partner can acknowledge which part of it is true if you learn how to communicate better with them. You have to learn to work with the wounded child. This is a part of the soul work that I do with my clients. Your wounded child needs to know you are there for them and you are not going to abandon them. Working with someone like myself who can support you in this healing work can help you to comfort your inner child, to know that they can rely on your presence and self-love. You need to learn to pause and take a time out to deal with your triggers so they don't escalate in communication. Resist thinking in terms of always and never. He always does this, she never does that. Triggered feelings tend to get generalized. Take time to explore what is happening with your partner. What caused them to behave that way? What was motivating them? Ask questions before you come to your conclusions. Get to know who they are. Get to know what affects them and be open to hearing and receiving their truth. Triggers can be problematic when they are not handled with care. They are meant to get your attention so you can heal unresolved issues. By choosing to confront your triggers or address them, you are choosing to confront past hurts so they no longer control your present experiences. Remove yourself from the situation when you get triggered to get some perspective. The goal is to manage your emotions when they show up so they don't cause more problems. Your relationships will thank you in the long run. You cannot submit to what you cannot trust, and you can't love what you can't trust. You will struggle to move forward and create healthy, loving relationships when you are trapped in the toxic, traumatic, unloving relationships of the past. If you are on the other side of a relationship but still don't feel free emotionally, it's because you are still emotionally bound. But a good woman deserves a good man, and a good man deserves a good woman. A good man shouldn't settle for anything less than a good woman, and a good woman shouldn't settle for anything less than a good man. But it's going to be a challenge for you to even see the good if you're still holding on to shit, shame, hurt, insecurities, and triggers. But remember, you deserve beautiful, healthy, loving, happy, and successful relationships. Letting go of your shit is more advantageous to you than holding on to it. Yes, I understand that shit can be embarrassing, and you don't want anyone to know you have it. But guess what? We all do. And all shit stinks. Yours, mine, and theirs. The person who suffers by keeping it all in and not seeking relief from the toxicity of it all is the one who holds on to it. And the one thing that suffers the most because of retained shit is relationships. The relationship you have with yourself and the one you have with others. Others can include your spouse, your significant other, your children, your friends, your family members, co-workers, etc. It's time to let the shit go and create space for love, happiness, peace, and an amazing life and relationship. When you feel like nobody loves you, remember you can choose to love yourself. When your world feels upside down, remember you can choose to turn it right side up. When you feel like a chapter has ended, remember you can choose to write a new chapter. The two biggest reasons why most people hold on to shit is because they don't want other people to know they have it, and they don't feel like they have a safe space in which to release it. When you work with me as your life coach, I promise I got you. You might have heard of therapy, but you're not really sure how a life coach can help you. Therapy simply means healing. You know, like when you break your body through a traumatic event, there's a process of protocols that help you to heal. One of those healing paths may be physical therapy to help you to learn how to walk again. Therapy is supposed to support you in healing your injury so you can restore your body to working order. After 10 years, if you are still going to therapy and can't walk, then therapy isn't working for you or you aren't working the therapy. I have had many clients tell me that working with me did more for them in a few sessions than years of therapy did for them. I describe myself as one who assesses the problem, helps you to discover how you can move through the problem, and as your personal life coach, I offer you a safe, judgment-free zone as I support you and walk with you to the other side of the challenges that hinder you from being the absolute best version of yourself. My clients include professional women and men who are looking for an alternative to therapy that is more advice-based, women and men who realize they need to learn how to do life differently to get different results, women and men needing post-divorce recovery support, single women and men who desire to be in love again, but struggle to get past the emotional shit, married women and couples struggling to make their relationship work, but are not sure whether it's fixable or over, women and men who struggle with a self-identity, negative self-talk, and confidence as a result of childhood issues and broken relationships. And I work with women and men who desire to tap into their greatest self and find their own sense of purpose. I want to thank you. Thank you for staying until the end of today's webinar. And because you did, I want to offer you a one-time discount on what I am offering you today. Once you leave this page, this discount offer will disappear and you won't be able to get this price again. So take advantage of my discount offer to you today if you are ready to change the way you experience life and relationships. Go to www.lettheshitgo.com and schedule your coaching session with me. Your happiness, your wholeness, and your mental and emotional wellness is your responsibility to yourself. So don't deprive yourself of what you deserve and can have today. Let's get you on track to healing the emotional wounds of your past as you let the shit go and welcome love and happiness into your life that you can experience firstly with and for yourself, and then with others, if you so choose to. Remember, the greatest relationship that you can cultivate is the one with yourself, because you have complete control over that one. It's just you and you. Because whatever the relationship with yourself looks like, it will be reflected back to you through and in your relationships with others. If during today's webinar you experience tears, tightness in your chest, discomfort, or were triggered by painful memories from your past, then you and I should talk. Again, take advantage of the $100 discount I am offering you today and go to www.lettheshitgo.com right now. Schedule your session with me, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.